Hi, welcome everyone to the launch of the June issue of Garland magazine. Ancestors are here. I'm speaking to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people from Naarm, Melbourne, and I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and to the ancestors of the lands where you come from. And I think it's particularly pertinent with this issue that for many Indigenous peoples, we're familiar with a regard and honouring of ancestors, which is to do with sustaining traditional practices and stories that have been passed down by generations. And to a degree, there are many stories in this issue that reflect that. But as with any issue with Garland, it's quite surprising to see what stories come in. I'm not sure how people find out about it, but it seems many people are looking for a platform to share a particular kind of story that's meaningful, and it's not really selling a product or anything like that, but it just has something of a human essence about it. And one of the interesting developments and learnings from this issue is the number of stories that were about what you might see as ancestral figures associated with freedom struggles. That is, people who fought for the kinds of values that we might take for granted today, like a democracy, equality of gender, and other rights. And I guess it's an interesting reflection how, to an extent, many of those rights have become part of bureaucracy, part of government, things that we sort of take for granted. But as we see with the rise of fascism around the world, that what we thought of as the lessons of World War II in terms of the dangers of more right-wing racist nationalism can be forgotten. And so looking back to what you might consider ancestors in terms of freedom fighters, and this is particularly so in the stories of South Africa and Chile, can be emboldening. That we learn that these were not just things that dropped from the sky, but values that people fought for. And so that's really interesting to see how that emerged in this issue. And we'll discover that over the next hour as we hear from everyone about the stories that they've shared. So welcome, and it's very great to see everyone coming from many different lands, from Australia, from India, from Nigeria, from Palestine, uh, as well as bringing the heritages of other countries like Vietnam and China and Italy here as well. So I'll just put up on the screen the the issue that we have, and as you might know, each issue is dedicated to the memory of a particular individual who's recently passed. And in this case, we remember Takashi Wakamiya, who was a lacquer master who established the Hikoju Makia studio in Wajima, Japan. And this is one that was recently subject of an exhibition in Sydney, and Big writes very movingly about her relationship to Takashi-san. So if we start here, we can begin with Shirabi. And Shirabi shared a story for us, which was about some dresses that were recovered from a bombing in Rafah from the museum there by the Palestinian Museum. And the director there, Amir Shamali, did share with us the story of how they were rescued and how they're going to be now shown in museums around the world. And it was very important that at the same time, we hear from someone about the actual current state of Tatriz embroidery in Gaza. And so Shirabi Yamada from Sambula, a wonderful organization in Jerusalem, kindly shared with us a report recently of what life is like for these embroiderers. So, Shirabi, thank you very much for that. Would you like to to tell us, just personally how it's going in your mind for these embroiderers in Gaza.
Sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and hello, everybody. My name is Shirabe Yamada, and I am the executive director of a Palestinian nonprofit fair trade organization called Sumbula. I'm clearly not Palestinian. I am Japanese, actually. So my ancestry is not from here, but I am working to support those Palestinians who are striving and doing their best to protect their ancestral heritage and culture and artisanal work that is facing the almost near complete destruction in Gaza Strip, and as well as facing a lot of risk of being disappearing in the West Bank. I wrote in a piece about the current status of what is happening with our partner producer groups in Gaza Strip. And in an article, I spoke about how these two craft groups have been physically, their facilities have been destroyed, and almost everybody who worked there have been displaced. However, in their displacement, they are continuing to work and trying to get a hold of any kind of materials that are still available within Gaza. And they are continuing to produce. Currently, because of the total closure by the Israeli army of the Gaza Strip, nothing leaves Gaza at all. And we have a fair trade shop in Jerusalem where we used to market their products, and many of our customers almost every day ask about, if there's anything left from Gaza that they can purchase. And people are eager to support the artisans in Gaza, and also the products that we used to receive from Gaza used to be so beautifully made in design and quality and execution, and just the pure quality of the artisanal work was so exceptional that they used to be our top
This is
sellers.
the program plan.
We asked
What I just
those, I'm sorry? Oh,
That's all
sorry.
right. I'll just if you turn
International.
your microphone off if you're not speaking, thanks. Yes, Shirabi, go ahead. Sorry, you've gone on to mute. If you could turn your microphone on.
Also, Kevin, can the volume be increased a little bit, please?
I'm sorry, that'll have to be done at your end.
Right, okay.
Hello, Shirabi.
Okay, sure. So currently there's no way of things being leaving Gaza, and the entry into Gaza Strip by even the aid agencies or humanitarian workers is extremely restricted. And we ask the customers of ours who are working for this agency if there's anybody who could just bring any quantity of the items out of Gaza, so that we can sell and then send the money back to the artisans. And that is not even possible in the current state, that even those aid agencies from international organizations entering Gaza, they are under a very tight security check. So that's what we are, where we are right now. I also would like to touch on a little bit about the current state in the West Bank, as you know that since last week, there has been exchange of attacks between Israel and Iran. And West Bank is a territory that is being occupied militarily by the Israeli government and army, so that there has never been a freedom of movement here for people living here, working here, between, moving between the communities. There are military checkpoints and soldiers, but those restrictions have become so much more tighter since October 7th, and like since last week, even tighter. I was on the phone with one of our artisan groups this morning, and they say that there is a military gate in front of their village that they cannot move easily, that they used to take the back roads. Now the back roads has a new checkpoint being set up, as well as one of the houses in the village has been taken over the soldier, and they displaced the families, and now it's being used as a military watchtower. However, all our artisans are continuing to work and produce work under these circumstances. So our role is to continue supporting them, trying to market their products as much as possible to keep the livelihood open for the artisans, as well as continue to tell their stories to the wider world to raise awareness. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirabi. And certainly, Sambuga has all of our support, and I hope more people continue to purchase products or at least respond to your fundraising so that you can continue the good work that you do. Thank you so much. And
Thank you, Kevin.
now we go to India to look at the article by Shrey Mara. Are you there, Shrey?
I am.
Oh, good. Would you like to speak to your article?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, and pardon me for joining a little bit late. I've had internet issues. Hello, everybody. I am very pleased to be saying hello to all of you today. I hope you're having a lovely day. My article is about the Siddhi community in India, who have a very interesting history even outside of their quilting practices. But the article looks specifically at their quilting practices. I can hear a bit of echo. I hope that's not me, Kevin.
No, I've muted them.
All right. The reason I write this article actually is the story began many, many years ago when I was about 10 years old. And my mom and dad introduced me to somebody called Anita Reddy. They went somewhere on a holiday and left me with their friend. And she was this incredible artist, and she had this home full of art, and she was a designer and doing very interesting things with textiles, which got me interested in textiles and so on. Now, 10 years later, I met with her again and I asked her, "What have you been up to? I haven't seen you in so long." And she told me this incredible story about the work she's been doing, which for her also happened by chance. A long time ago, a close friend took her to his village for a wedding, and at the wedding, she was a guest, and the home that and the guest room that she was put up in had these incredibly beautifully done abstract quilts that she saw, and she saw them all around the house, and she got very inquisitive about it, and found out that these are a mainstay of the community, and they've been making these quilts for a long time. And she started this great period of inquiry into it and learned a lot more about the quilting practice, and sort of has now brought it brought more global attention to it. The Siddhis themselves are a very interesting community. The name Siddhi itself is not one that the community has given itself. These are people of African descent who arrived in India and settled in along India's western coast, which is known which goes roughly from Gujarat all the way down to Kerala, India's western India's western coast. And I believe a lot of African origin people came over for various reasons. Sometimes they came as enslaved people, sometimes they came as soldiers, sometimes they came as attendants on ships. They came for various reasons. They came or were brought to India and they settled across that region, which is also the coast, which saw a lot of traffic. And what happened is they ended up settling down, assimilating, learning the language of the land, of the particular lands they lived in. But it is purely because of government standardization that they're called the Siddhi people. Really, all the people of African origin who are called Siddhis don't necessarily come from the same part of the African continent, nor do they share similar ancestral, similar sort of migratory origins. It is a very invented term that now the community has sort of also accepted, and they refer to themselves as the Siddhis. So you have Siddhis living in Gujarat, you have Siddhis in Maharashtra, you have further down, you have Siddhis living in Karnataka. Now, Anita Reddy, the Siddhis that she met were the Siddhi community who live in this beautiful forested region of northern Karnataka in southern India. And that is where she had gone to that wedding. So they are one part of this larger Siddhi community. And Siddhi folks have been, wherever they live along this Western belt, they have been practicing, like most other migratory communities around the world, they practice different forms of assimilation with the communities that live around them. Now, quilting is a practice that has existed in this region for a very long time. The Siddhis don't claim to have sort of invented quilting or invented this particular form of quilting. They say, in this part of Karnataka at least, the Siddhi women say that this is just another skill they picked up from the communities around them. They would see that they were traveling quilters. They were traveling communities known as the Banjaras who would come and gather old clothes from them and then return months later with finished quilts and give them back to them. And there was sort of exchange in kind. And the Siddhi women realized that they were handy with a needle and thread, and they had old clothes themselves. And so they began practicing this particular form of quilting, and it's over generations become part of what the Siddhi women do. And so the history is interesting, contemporary practice is interesting, because now quilting in Karnataka is not just practiced by the Siddhis. In fact, this sort of very abstract quilt that you see is practiced nearly across the board in this Western region. In fact, you have quilting practices in other parts of India as well. It's very common to take old clothes, old worn cotton clothes, and sort of redo them, turn them into quilts. It's especially used to swaddle babies, for example. Soft cloth, children need soft cloth. And so she started looking at the histories of quilting and studying how this particular community came to make quilts and how women who quilt are and their homes become centers for other women to come and not only learn but also bring memory, bring storytelling, bring community into that quilting space. And she started speaking to the community, tried to and she saw that as a designer, she saw that they were very beautiful. No two quilts are alike. There is almost no codification of the kind of design that appears on the quilts. And every woman does the kind of quilt she wants to make. But there's also no absence of motive. They pick whatever motive appeals to them. They see a motive on a printed dress bought in the market. They sort of integrate that. They see a traditional sort of embroidery pattern that somebody bought from 6 villages away. That is another, it's called kasuti. So they said, well, this looks cool. We can replicate it. So the design language that is still very much developing amongst Siddhi women quilters is very uniquely theirs, whilst also being an amalgamation of the things that inspire them, the colors that inspire them, what is available and what is not available. And of course, it continues to be made out of waste material. So she is now, I think it's been about a decade of working with the women. And what she's begun doing is getting in touch with mills and sourcing waste cloth and waste material and taking those to the Siddhi quilters and helping them turn it into a monetized operation through which they can continue to quilt and continue to retain that ethos of self-chosen designs and self-chosen sort of patterns, but also try and scale it up to not only invite more women to continue quilting, but also retain the idea that handmade quilts are durable, they can be passed on, they can be sold, and they can help these very impoverished, resource poor women also make a living for themselves. So that's a little bit
Yes,
about the article.
that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Beautifully told, Shrey. It's an
Thank you.
inspiring story, which obviously resonates also with stories like the G's Bend quilts amongst African Americans in the USA. Thank you so much, Shrey.
Thank you. Thank you very
And
much.
now we go to kind of an industrial legacy in South Australia with the story by Flossie Pech, I think is with us today. Are you there, Flossie? Would you like to talk to your story? Is your
Unmute.
microphone working?
Is
Yeah,
that right?
I can hear you.
How's that?
Good. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm sorry I'm on two appliances here because I can't, like some of the others, I couldn't hear the audio. So I put my phone on and that's my audio, which is connected to a headset. So I can hear what others are saying, which I'm very grateful for. Um, Thank you, Kevin. I first of all want to thank you for the invitation to write about verbieben, which is a German word meaning German interweaving. My project, verbieben, is is exhibited, has just finished being exhibited in Lobethal, South Australia, where I lived for a time when this mill, the woolen mill, now called the Onkaparinga Mill, which was, of course, the label, a very important label in Australia, um, was being shut down. It had been bought out by a foreign agency, theoretically moved to Warrnambool. That didn't happen because the machines went and the workers didn't, and no blanket was produced in Warrnambool that compared to what was produced in the Onkaparinga. While I lived in Lobethal, and these paintings are all from 1993. I painted all the workers at their machines in the process of making blankets. So Onkaparinga has been a famous label for the best woolen blankets in Australia. They were used by the airlines, the first airlines, as the online blankets. And these machines and the people running them, who for 3 generations in the small town of 1,500 people, um, were absolutely committed to the product and to all the variations. So I did these paintings, and then, um, as you might, took excess wool, cut off bits and things that had been hanging around the mill in the 6 months from when they were bought out to when they were shut down. And I saved these in a suitcase in my studio, and eventually I've used them to make tapestry weavings, which are exhibited here. And in the end, I had 42 A4 sized tapestries that were made while I was teaching in very remote parts in indigenous communities in Australia. So all the way from Torres Strait to WA to Queensland, um, living myself remote for 4 years to produce these uh, weavings. Now, there's also this one that's on view now called Kith and Kin, and that was weaving with the wool from the Onkaparinga mill on a deconstructed wooden cot that I used for my children. And it signifies, uh, if you like, a fence to keep our children protected, but also a ladder in the overall picture of the Kith and Kin installation to bring children to the next level. So it's covering a whole lot of iconic imagery through women's work, which we would say was weaving, but not so on a professional level in the industrial mill, which was, of course, everybody's work. And when it left the town pretty much died for its industry. So going back just this year, almost 30 years later, to exhibit the paintings of people at the machines, plus my weavings, which had been generated while I was away in all parts of Australia, was a very wonderful opportunity to show off the skills of people working the machines, and then, of course, expanding that with my weavings on a theme of remoteness and skill, I hope.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Flossie. And it certainly resonates
Thanks.
with the story we heard just before with Shrey, but also I think with Blanket yet to come later in the issue. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Now we hear from Dr. Irfan Ahmad, who is with us as well from Kashmir. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Hope I am audible.
Yes, you are. Yes. And you wrote a wonderful story about the Pashmina.
So it was about a story that was casted into the mind in 2021 when we wrote an article in the Garland. It was about a portable heater that was used by the people of Kashmir for making them warm in the harsh winters. So it was in 2021 when we conceived the idea to write about the Pashmina, the king of the fibers that happens to be chosen as a hair follicle from the Pashmina goats that inhabit an area of 3,000 to 4,000 altitude, an area which is the northmost part of the Kashmir, that's the Ladakh. So basically, when this industry was conceived in the 1400th century, because of the people or the traders that came from the Central Asia to Kashmir, people in Kashmir were very poor. There was much of poverty in Kashmir. And when the traders from the Central Asia, from the Silk Route, they came to Kashmir, they came with artisans and the people who had the art to weave this fabric. So they made these people of Kashmir understand what this Pashmina fiber is, and all the industry in the 1400th century, it was all man-made, and there were artisans, and these artisans, they drove all their skill into this. So it was the King Zainul Abidin Badshah in the 14th century that institutionalized this trade and art, and it was one of the most important sectors so far as the Kashmir's economy in the 14th and the 1500th century was concerned. There were certain hiccups in 1860s when there was a turmoil against the Dogras, wherein a lot of taxation was imposed upon the people of Kashmir, and it resulted into the death of the 28 artisans. That has been recorded into the history. So our perspective was what the machine has done in order to increase the sphere of influence of this fabric, because this fabric was available only to the rich, and the cost of it was not affordable to the common people. So the introduction of the machines into this trade, what they did, the type and the level of the production that we had for the Pashmina, it was not meeting the demands within the Kashmir and outside the Kashmir. So we chose two important personalities. One of the persons who has an experience of about 4 decades in this trade, and he happens to be a pure artisan. He has introduced machines not to make a shawl or a product from Pashmina, but in order to weave the product so that we have a woven product in a good percentage. And then all the processes of weaving or artistry or making the designs with the hand or needlework, they are done with the artisans. So his perspective was that I'm only weaving the yarn from the machine, and rest all the processes I'm doing with the help of the artisans, because we have to meet the demand and the production of the world. And second important perspective from his point of view was that when we have made this type of product, it has made this product affordable to the common masses of Kashmir and to the common people who cannot just afford when it goes in, say, $1,000 or more than that. The second important perspective was from an industrialist who has a machine type of setup where all the things they are woven They are designed, and all these things are done with the help of machines. And he says, I am doing this work because the handwork cannot meet the production. But at the end of this, he says that the level and the intricate art of the hand weaving, it cannot, the machine cannot made it. The last thing was that Kevin asked me, what are the procedures? How can we say that which is a real type of the pashmina? The Jammu and Kashmir Handicrafts government department, they have introduced the GI tags. And we have a craft center in the heart of the capital city, Srinagar, wherein they do the microscopic and the tests for the fiber where it happens to be a natural one. Because when we see this fiber under a microscope, it has a particular design that cannot be matched or cloned by a synthetic fiber. So what they do, they just check the fiber and all the history, wire from the fiber, the type of the goat, the location of the goat, the type of the artisan which has weaved it, all the information is present in the GI tag. So if anybody has a doubt whether he or she is getting a authentic pashmina product or not, so the first and the foremost thing is the GI tag. Then there are other types of the tests which have their own limitations. So it was all about this pashmina from Kashmir. So I hope,
Yes.
thank you, Kevin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irfan. It's good to hear perspective practically in terms of Kashmir and the Pashmina and how it can be accessible. And as we've seen, there is a story, a human story attached to the machine, not just to the
Yes.
bench as well. And now let's hear from Niloufar and Pamela C, who have shared a story which is very interesting about the work. I'm not sure how you'd like to go about this, whether Niloufar, you'd like to talk about your work briefly, or Pamela, you'd like to say something?
Oh, I speak a lot at Garland events. I'm really happy if Niloufar would like to speak to. I mean, I can just quickly explain why I wrote the article and then pass it to you, Niloufar, if you like. So
Sure.
I was just so impressed. I first saw her work in a show at One Space Gallery called Tensile Connections, and it was actually, the opening was delayed by a meteorological event, a bad weather event, and just by ironically that one artwork in particular, Equitable Goddess. Yes, I'm sorry. It was just it's just had so much of your ancestral wisdom in there. I felt that's the way I saw it, of survival, of resilience, because it depicted Anahita, I think is how you pronounce her name, the goddess of
That's correct, Anahita.
Wisdom and fertility, and her hair was flowing like this big torrent of water with a lot of other symbols around it, and it just seemed this really strong message that we're going to be okay. But I think which is why that I was really fortunate and very grateful to work with you and Kevin to be able to bring this to our readership. So
Thanks.
I think that's enough from me, though. You can explain all your amazing processes and
Oh.
heritage, and I hope, is that okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you, Kevin, just for having me here, for including me in my work. Really fortunate that Pamela has came across my work. When I created the work, it was for a solo exhibition, and the theme that I had picked was influenced after all the natural disasters we had in Australia, all the crazy raging fires and the flood. So that was my theme. Too little, too much. Sometimes we have too little rain, sometimes we have too much rain, and that's the cause of natural disasters we have. It's easy if I go over it now and say Anahita, her hair, this, that, but it wasn't pinpoint the story. It wasn't plan how to start, I had to go through it myself to figure out how I'm going to explain what I want to explain and what is it that I want to explain. Obviously, I'm not a scientist, and I didn't want to go over articles and basically retell them. I knew I wanted that both sides of the climate change argument feel they can connect. I'm not taking sides. They can just share their story with what they see. And also I wanted to display it is a timeless problem. It's not new. People always had problems with natural disaster in different cultures, not just Persia. While in Persia specifically, we don't have those themes of gods and goddesses. It's mostly Mesopotamia. That you will see, like in Roman gods and goddesses, to send a rage for something punishing people or things like that. Still, the stories are borderless. The stories, even if it wasn't originally from Iran or Persia at a time, they are the stories that were told. So I decided to choose the theme of gods and goddesses for this environment issues. People can take what they want, what they feel. If they can feel this is what it is, this is what experiencing. We had Ice Age too. This is out of our hand. We can't help it. That's their take. And if people are like, well, who are our gods and goddesses nowadays? Who are the ones who make the decisions nowadays? That would be their take. Something I decided to do in the middle of the way while I was sketching was this goddess was opposite those ancient goddesses. This one was just protective. It had all her heart and soul to protect the people, assure them everything's gonna be right. To me, her hair is her mind, her intention. And when that hair, that water connects to the water from the jug falling off her hand, it's her action. He's actually doing it. She's actually doing it. It's not just intention.
Niloufar, we'll have to move on.
Sorry.
Right. But thank you
Sorry.
so much. And certainly Anahita's
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry.
before, and it's a very powerful story, particularly, I imagine, for women in Iran as well. And we obviously think of them now that people are also suffering bombardment. Thank you so much, Niloufar.
Thank you for
Pleasure
having
to have
me.
your work. And now we go to Nigeria, to Emmanuel. Greetings, who's shared with us another story from Cultural Canvas of a wonderful festival, this one specifically to do with honouring the ancestors. Just give us a brief rundown of and perhaps you can pronounce the name better than I can, Egbelaganza.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. I say thank you to Garland Magazine, and thank you to Dr. Murray as well. So it's Egbeliganza. It's a festival to celebrate an iconic and an ancestor in the Yoruba culture by the name Lishabi Agbogboakala. So just to give a quick context to Nigeria and the ethnicity, Nigeria is located in the West African part. In West Africa, is the most populous country in Africa with diverse ethnicity of over 250, which is often categorized into three, which are Yoruba, Igbos, and Hausa and Fulani. Lishabi Angbubuakala is an Egba heroic warrior from a small town in Abeokuta. The town is called Itoku. In the late 18th century, he led a successful revolt against the Oyo Empire oppressive tribal system. Oyo Empire can be compared to the Ottoman Empire, who, in terms of their influence and their centralized control, they ruled over different subgroup in the Yoruba part of Nigeria, and they were very brutal in their approach and very mean through their tax collection. So it got to a point that the Yoruba people, particularly the Egba Fed, got tired of this maltreatment. So Agbongwa Akala, which is was a farmer then, devised a means to push away and fight again, to fight for the liberation and the independence of Egba people. So he formed a group called Egbe Haro. Egbe Haro is more like a cooperative society where farmers weekly kind of um, rotate cooperation between themselves to help themselves to cultivate farms. So what he did is over a period of time, he did that across people, different farmers. But when it got to his turn, he asked for that to be returned in favor by coming together to fight against the Oyo Empire. And in 1780, they were able to conquer the Oyo Empire, and this led to the independence and the sovereignty of the Egba people from the Oyo Empire. This leadership of Lishabi is not just around just in the independence, but it went further ahead to fortify and help Egba people um, to fight against other empires such as the Daomi that could encroach their land and also subject them to the same hardship and the torture that they went through with the Oyo Empire. So one thing that actually made him mysterious, made him a mythologized semigod, was how he passed on. He disappeared in a forest called Igbo Lishabi, and in reference to pay homage to him, a lot was done by the Egba people, because to the Egba people, which is the Abeokuta and some part of the Egba community, can stand alone and stand alone in their independence and leverage that can be attributed to Lishabi. So this honor was devised in a form of yearly celebration of his iconic warriorship through the Lishabi Festival. This also was also inculcated into an anthem which the son and daughters of Egba um becomes an anthem for the song of sons and daughters of Egba till today. The song was composed by the father of the late Afrobeat singer Fela Kuti. The name of his father is J.J. Ransom Kuti. And also, a school was also named after Lishabi, which is Lishabi High School. So today, presently, Lishabi Festival is one of the most prominent festival, and is coming so fast to limelight, not just as a festival, but a community of unity, resilience, celebration, fashion, arts, culture, and a creative economy for the country.
Right.
So that is just my own summary.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And certainly we're getting to learn much more about Nigerian culture thanks to you, and coincides with things like the Lushabi series on Netflix as well. So the world is opening its eyes to Nigeria, and we'll hear another story soon. We look forward to more stories from you. Thank you so much. And now we go to Colm. Hello. Greetings. Colm shared a wonderful story, which really asked the question about our relationship to ancestors, particularly those of us who are of settler descent. Colm, greetings.
Greetings. So the question, it's quite different than other people in terms of it's not so much about textiles, etc. It's more about that relationship people have in terms of especially in settler colonial world, where they have a relationship to somewhere else, doesn't necessarily matter where, but it's not in that place, and then so they're not really part of that place from whether it's Ireland, India, or Italy. It doesn't really matter which country, but they're also not they're not really part of the place that they're actually living in either. So this conundrum is what partly, well, for Australians, it's sort of central to their identity. Whether they acknowledge it or not is another question. But yeah, so this is part of what we're addressing with the not only the Ancestor Workshop, but we've created a storytelling workers cooperative called Singing Blackbird, and we're examining the possibilities for actually finding a way through that conundrum. So yeah, I'll be very brief. I mean, it sort of speaks for itself, and it's, some people have that perspective. It's a sort of more animist perspective that the world is alive, and the ancestors aren't just, even though folks might die, whether it's blood ancestors or sort of creatures or rivers or mountains or whatever it might be, a tree. Yeah, so it's sort of pushing that perspective, because my sense is that what's happening in the world, all the chaos and craziness, it's actually opening up this possibility for this way, or this deep connection with place to actually return. So that's really the premise that we're sort of exploring.
Thanks so much, Coleman. I think it also is interesting by connecting to the Irish, particularly pre-Christian culture, in the idea of there being vessels for this kind of knowledge and the objects and rituals attached to that, which is good work. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Some of them are sitting there.
Okay, I see. Good. Thanks a lot.
Great.
And now we go to Lilo. You're still here. Wonderful to see you. You shared an exhibition that you had about your Italian forebears. You're on mute.
Hello everyone, and I'm immensely, I don't have words to explain my gratitude for the opportunity to contribute a short piece about my mother, the female side of the family, I suppose. In terms of ancestors, from our knowledge, my sisters and I can only go back 3 generations, so we don't have a great deal of knowledge about the history, but we decided for this exhibition, we decided to focus on our mother and show her resilience in time of adversity. My father was one of those that you mentioned earlier who really believed that by joining the Italian army, he was doing something wonderful and liberating, and he ended up being a prisoner of war in Kenya and wasn't repatriated until 8 years later. So there was a long stretch, there was the first long period that my mother waited, and she was surrounded. She survived and she thrived because she was surrounded by the women in the family. It was an extended family, and they all contributed, my grandmothers, my aunties, and my mother. Embroidery was something that it's a long tradition in Italy, that part of Italy where we come from, of embroidery, and it was taught at the time, was taught in convents. Girls would be sent to the convent to be taught how to become fine embroiderers. But my mother was an autodidact. She taught herself. She experimented. She worked with whatever she had at hand, whatever it was at hand, and she created these wonderful works of art in some instances which are not part of the exhibition because we don't have them, but she used wool and she used cotton and she used embroidery. So she extended herself across a range of medium. Of course, when in 1955 we left to come to Australia, you couldn't bring everything. We only brought, she brought a selection of materials and embroideries and works that she had created. And we arrived in original city in Bendigo in 1955, not exactly a hot spot of multiculturalism. So you were expected to assimilate, and we didn't appreciate the richness that we had brought with us. So the items remain in trunks and hidden away. And this was a great opportunity, in a way, to open one of those trunks and to show some of the fine work that our mother created, but also the history of female and the expectations of females, that there wasn't going to be, they weren't expected to be ambitious in terms of professionalism. They were expected to get married at an early age and become good housewives. And with that went the trousseau. And so I was still at primary school when our mother started gathering special items from my trousseau. And the bedspread, the wall hanging, is one of those items that she started gathering for my
It's
trousseau.
great that you can share that with us. I'm afraid we'll have to move on because
Yeah, so thank you very, very much. But that's basically, the context of the exhibition, which closed last Saturday.
Right. Well, I'm glad we got it out in time. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
for that.
Kevin.
And next we go back to India, to Priyanka, who's been a regular contributor to Garland, some of the best articles that we've published, and another wonderful, beautiful piece about this particular kind of accountancy. Would you like to speak to your article, Priyanka?
Yes, thank you so much, Kevin. Greetings to all of you present in the meeting. Before I start telling you about what this article is, the whole idea about understanding the books of accounts came from my study of where is fabric used by our ancestors, not just for clothing, but for other means, maybe in the kitchen, maybe while traveling, and what are the other things. So there we go. That fabric was also used for writing, for making the books of accounts by ancestors. And the interesting part is, when I was young, I have always seen my ancestors. I've seen my great grandfather, my grandfather, my father, all of them writing these beautiful books of accounts on these handmade books, which are called bahi khatas, in the western part of India. And the interesting thing is that this has this whole article has two parts. One is the making of this book, which is made with red cloth and white stitches. And the second is the script, which is written inside, which is the vernacular script. For the half of the page is for debit and half of the page is for credit. And the very interesting part is that this is a whole ritualistic thing that happens in the country, especially during the festival of Diwali, where they would sort of invite the goddess of wealth, the goddess Lakshmi, to bless their business, to bless the trade opportunities that will come along the next year, through an interesting first page that they sort of, have 9 dots which signify 9 planets, the folds of the Vahi Khata and everything else, so that the goddess sort of, places their, bestows their blessings, and then the process goes on. And this whole story sort of came into being when one day, when I was sitting with a friend having a cup of tea, and he told me that his mother still writes the traditional method of accounting, not the financial tools that we use on our computer anymore. To maintain the books of accounts for his own family run business. And that's what sort of, dived me into looking into my trunks, looking into my family, talking to various ancestors, and understanding how a simple mundane thing like writing the books of accounts can also have an art and can also sort of trace back to our ancestors as to how much money did they spend, where did they spend, how much did they save, and it all is very interesting to know at the end of the day. So I've definitely enjoyed writing this article, and I hope all of you enjoy reading it as well. Thank you so much, Kevin, and the Garland magazine for this opportunity. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much for sharing it, Priyanka. It's a beautiful story, and I recommend everyone have a look at it and hope to hear from you again. Now we go to Mai Nguyen Long. Hello, are you there? Hi, Mai. You're on mute. It's great to share another story of yours about Mokmak.
Thank you, Kevin, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing such wonderful stories today. Yeah, so my story is again looking back at where this character, I'm a contemporary artist, and I had this image of a girl vomiting beginning to appear in my artwork around 2014, and she wouldn't go away. And this spurred a whole journey of my reconnection with Vietnam. And in particular, I realized that I needed to go back to this experience I had in 1994 when I discovered these. And Kevin, please just cut me off because I will just ramble otherwise. So feel free. But I encountered in 1994 when I first encountered these Ding wood carvings, and before that point in time, I actually was I'm Australian born. I grew up in the Philippines and Papua New Guinea, and I was disconnected from my Vietnamese heritage. So I really was grown up with images of war and violence, and I particularly the Vietnam/American War. And I didn't know that Vietnam had an art form because also in that pre-internet era, in Australia, I couldn't find any books in the library here, and there was no opportunity to learn Vietnamese language either. So anyway, I went to Vietnam and I was very interested in these Ding wood carvings in the Red River Delta of northern Vietnam, in particular the 16th to 18th century, because this was a particular time in Vietnam when it was the rulers were more supportive of artisans of the villages and the artisans, and so there was an opportunity for village arts to thrive. And also, like post the they have this narrative of 1,000 years of Chinese rule in Vietnam, and then after that period, during that period, Confucianism was introduced, whereas the society was more matriarchal leaning before that. So after the Chinese left, then Vietnam tended to swing between either Confucian rule or Buddhist rule, and Buddhism was closer to the matriarchal animist system that pre-existed. So, and this period, the Mac dynasty, where these wood carvings began to thrive, particularly the ones that I was interested in, which are very lively and tell the life of the village as opposed to what the dynastic rulers might dictate should be being represented in these artworks. And I thought it was a very special period. I mean, what I was trying to say is that I wanted to work out, because at the same time I was learning Vietnamese language and I came across the word mộc mạc, and I wanted to know what was it about these so-called rustic looking artworks that touched me so deeply that had I wanted I knew it was connected somehow with a deeper story about Vietnam. And so what I do is I trace trace that idea of Mok and then how it also became important to other contemporary artists along the way as they searched for an ideal of Vietnameseness in a context of not just the Chinese influence, but then the French and the American as well. And I worked that into the idea of Vomit Girl not just being a figure of spiritual illness, but rather learning from these folkloric practices of adaptation and grafting and transformation, learning creative strategies for resilience, and her persona then becomes an idea of absorbing and transforming negative energies rather than just being a symbol of illness. And I found I couldn't go on this journey without researching as much as I could about the arts of Vietnam and then learning the language. So it tells a little bit about that story and key points in that history of Vietnam that I saw expressions of Mok in. So that's kind of like a brief outline of what I speak about.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Mai. It certainly tells a story about the way displacement, intergenerational displacement can help recover something of a culture that is not so well known to the rest of the world. So thank you so much for your work, and we look forward to following how it unfolds in the future.
Thank you, Kevin.
And now we go to back to Nigeria. Ngozi, are you still with us? Lovely to see you. Good. And you'll have to correct my pronunciation as well about the figure that your work talks about, Neburube. How do you say it?
Neburube. You're right.
Lucky.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, the story about Neburube, I didn't just started working on that particular story, but my artwork, being able to make foldable verses is, like, for me, kind of a response to challenges. And along the line, with my own personal challenges as a modern artist, I recall this story, this fable that I had as a young child. With your reference to the return of fascism, you find out that it's not like we have forgotten history, but it's just like we don't seem to learn from history. It continues to repeat itself, like it become a recycle of experience. When you, as a young girl, I should have learned something from this fable about the challenges that Neburube faced trying to raise her children, and then the reality of marriage and expectations. But it seems to not. I didn't learn anything. So, and watching other women around, I feel that we are all in the same shoe. We never learned anything, and it's not just particularly about the people of Eastern Nigeria, but I think it's a worldwide issue about women being attached to their children and then giving all for them. And then at the end of the day, you feel that you have given most time you even become resentful towards the people that you love so much and care about. And that's what I think I should, as a girl, should have learned from that story. But at the point I was listening to those stories when I was young, I think it didn't make meaning until now that I'm now in and lived experience that I recall the story. I'm telling the story through this art not basically to the world alone, but especially to my children. That I have 3 girls, but they can't wait to get married, even though they are still very young. And I was like, this is something that you should know before going into that, because it's not what you, the expectation is not, is totally different from the reality when you when you get married, and then you're expected to accept everything that is thrown to you or thrown at you, and be brave or strong enough to bear whether it's difficult or not. And it becomes cyclical because they think that that's how it should be. But I think it's not. But how do we change it if we continue to live in the same way? And that's what the story is all about, trying to learn from this and trying to find a way to stop this reoccurrence of history from mother extending to the children, the daughters mostly, and then reoccurring again over and over again.
Thank you. And
I don't know how I'm
encourage
making
everyone
sense.
to read the story that you've beautifully shared, Ngozi, and go well. And it's wonderful how you translate that story into new forms so that it can be freshly absorbed. Let's hope people learn from it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Good. Now we go to India, Aishani, to our wonderful partners, the MAP Academy, a story about the masks, the Majuli masks. Would you like to tell us about these incredible, scary things?
Very much so. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Hello, everyone. Hi, Shri. So my article is on a type of masks which are made in Assam in Northeast India, which depict many well-known figures from local traditions and Hindu mythologies. They're called Majuli masks, named after the island of Majuli on the river Brahmaputra, where they were first made many, many centuries ago. Now, the masks were conceived by a saint named Shankardeva, who preached Vaishnavism through the Assam region in the early 16th century. They are worn for theatrical performances which propagate Vaishnavism, which basically upholds the supremacy of Krishna, an incarnation of the Hindu god Vishnu. In Shankardeva's brand of Vaishnavism, Krishna is worshipped with this kind of absolute and unequivocal devotion and love, which has remained constant through the evolution of Vaishnavism over the centuries. And this exact fervor is reflected in the masks, in the mask making, and in the performances where they are worn. The masks, in fact, link the Vaishnava believers of today with the Vaishnavism of their ancestors and forebearers. In the olden days, they were used for preaching and philosophy. Today, they are tools that reinforce that same sense of cohesion and community among believers. In order to get a deeper understanding of how ancestral cultures permeate the present, we also take a look at the mask makers themselves. Many of them are performers as well. Some direct these performances, but most importantly, this craft of mask making has remained a hereditary profession through the centuries. The making of the mask requires very specific skills, but it also requires a very deep and innate understanding of Vaishnavism, its liturgical practices, and its mythologies. When we come across these mask makers, we often find them to be in a meditative state or in a sort of a trance as they carefully handle and craft these masks, which are also considered to be living or animate objects. Both the theatrical performance and the mask making are acts of worship within this form of Vaishnavism. And the masks are sacred and they have to be handled with care. There are, in fact, many stories of mishaps occurring because the masks were not propitiated properly or they were not handled with enough reverence. So then, looking at Majuli masks within the broader context of ancestors and with other wonderful articles from everybody else here, what are some of the main things that come up repeatedly in all of our sort of writings? There is this, I think, idea of community, cohesion, and spiritual well being, and the ways in which they find modern iteration through the making and donning of these masks, for instance. We find similar ideas emerging in many other articles in this issue, such as May's Vomit Girl series, for instance, or even in the colorful quilt making of the Siddhis in India, where community and belonging is constantly reiterated. Hidden within this, there is also an idea of quiet resistance, whether it is resistance to colonialism or encroachment of technology in unsavory ways, such as AI takeover of art and creative pursuits. There is a quiet resistance in the act of carrying on the crafts of our ancestors. But as humans of today, we are constantly looking back at the wisdoms, teachings, and beliefs of our ancestors. But the point is, there is more often than not a need for something tactile, something tangible that acts as a conduit between the past and the present, whether it is these sacred masks of Majuli or ceramic objects which connect people with their ancestors, or talismanic necklaces which serve as reminders of cultural values. And finally, it is important to understand, I think, the totality of what is being passed down and what has been passed down. Not just craft techniques or certain wisdoms, but also this act of living with these objects as though they were real human beings, or in the case of Majuli masks, sacred entities. The idea of being at one with the sacred or the non-human, this idea of communing with the spirits of our ancestors and the supernatural, this becomes important. It's no longer just about our pasts. It is now about the present and the future, and how, especially in contemporary geopolitical crises, the past very tangibly continues to be crucial to our daily existence and to posterity. So these were some of the points that I was deliberating on. That's all from my end, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Osana.
much.
Beautifully articulated. It would be a very good editorial for Garland, all those views, and thanks for bringing community in as a factor. We hadn't considered that, so that's very important. Thank you so much. And now we go to Tammy Wong Hubert.
Hello.
Greetings. Hello.
Evening, and I'm really pleased to be here amongst such an amazing group of makers, artists and makers, and also really amazed to hear about all the synergies between our articles. I'm here, I live and work here in Naarm, particularly at Mount Korhan Warrable on Wurundjeri country, and you can see the image that Kevin's sharing is actually one of my photographs, which is actually taken on One Tree Hill, which is on Wurundjeri country, which is where I live, the Mount Korhan Warrable, also known as the Dandenong Ranges. So my article, Mobile Ancestral Home, actually recounts my journey to rediscover my family ancestral village of Silchek Hum in southern China, which was expressed through craft, performance, and photography. And this is the place where my great-grandfather, who is pictured here in the image, and great-grandmother originally came from 5 generations ago. My great-grandfather actually arrived here in 1884. And I really wanted to understand if there was a place that I could call the home of my ancestors, as the connections to the ancestral village had actually become quite lost in my family. We knew about the general area that we were from, but not the specific village. And I started to understand those cultural practices further in the last couple of years and realised that the practices are quite specific for particular family clans and their attachment to a particular village. So the article actually recounts my research journey, and really I started to gain a good understanding of Taoist Buddhist ancestral worship practices. And it all kind of started with me trying to find our family history book, which is usually a document that's that records the family history, but it's usually a handwritten document. But we didn't have one in our family. It's quite possibly that it's been lost or, has gone to another branch of the family. But surprisingly, when I went to Silchek Hum, I actually was handed a printed family history book, which was written by this community. And I found the ancestral hall structure really interesting, and these are some of the photographs that Kevin's sharing. There were 3 ancestral halls in Silchek Hum village where we were connected to, and it was really amazing connecting. And I actually made contact with Mr. Wong, the village manager, during my research, and we visited, my family and I visited the village in 2024, and I've continued having a friendship with Mr. Wong. I often send him Happy New Year messages, and I told him that I was having an exhibition which was to celebrate my connection to Silchek Hum, and he was really thrilled that I was introducing his heritage list of the village to the world. But I wanted to say that learning about making work about the ancestral village has been, for me, about taking ownership of that ancestral connection. And because I'm so disconnected, I guess, with so many generations since my family left China, it's a difficult concept for me to grasp that there is a place that I might actually be Indigenous to. So it was a really interesting journey to go on. But the process contributed to the project, my creative project, Mobile Ancestral Home, which is in the article. And I wanted to bring together 2 concepts of home by recreating the mobile version of my ancestral home. And then to be able to carry that hand embroidered ancestral home as like a piece of baggage whilst in the act of walking on Wurundjeri country where I live. And the project was about converging my 2 concepts of home. And in the photograph, I'm actually dressed all in white because white is actually a funerary color that's worn in traditional Chinese culture, because I wanted to be a bit of a female ancestral ghost. Women generally aren't really recorded in that patriarchal system of the family sort of family history sort of structure. So, I actually participated in a walk in October last year called On Country in Residence, which was a walking residency led by Gretel Taylor, Gulshan Oza, and Wurundjeri artist Mandy Nicholson along the Nagaring Barrack mountain path, which is a newly established public art and cultural heritage path through where I live, Mount Korhan Warrable. And the residency is now evolved into the Nangarakal Maramu exhibition at the Barinja Cultural Centre Upway. I'm exhibiting with 8 other artists of different backgrounds, and I created further textiles works which actually mapped our walks on Wurundjeri country. We're using local birds and plants, and I aesthetically sort of was referencing a type of Chinese Huaniao painting, which is like bird flower painting, because we spoke a lot with Mandy about local birds and local fauna and local flora that was significant to Wurundjeri people. So it was really interesting. It came out of that conversation. And so it's been a great journey of learning and reconnecting with many marginalised practices on both sides, both here with Wurundjeri elders and also Wurundjeri knowledge holders, and also on the Chinese side, the ancestral practices as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share the project with you.
Thanks a lot, Tammy. And it's a great example of the kind of resonance between different cultures and their ancestors, the way in which you combine respect for country in Wurundjeri country with your own journey. I think that has resonance, particularly with Colm's work as well. And now we go to Tasmania, to Justy and Margaret, who were early forebears of the Thinker Maker for their essay in Garland in the Tasmania issue. Welcome again, Justy and Margaret. You're the final article in our launch,
Oh,
talking about embodying stories in objects.
thank you, Kevin, and I feel very humbled to be amongst all of you and just this extraordinary craftspersonship and artistry. So I'm Justy Phillips, and Margaret Woodward is my collaborator. We have a, I guess, collaboration called A Published Event, and we're coming to you.
Sorry, I just realised that
sorry.
Emma is still here, so it's not the last one.
Penultimate.
Okay.
We are joining you from the banks of Tintamilli Minanya, which is the River Derwent here, just south of Nipaluna, Hobart, on the island of Tasmania, Lutruwita. And our article, I guess, is about a current artist bookwork that we're making called The Rest of Us. Margaret and I are very much conceptual artists, so I guess what's important to us is the philosophical, metaphysical, and sort of idea and clarity of that. But saying that, we very much come from a background of writing and publishing. So The Rest of Us is a knitted bookwork, which is published one page a week as a knitted blanket, machine knitted, industrially knitted blanket. So each week, Margaret and I write a new page of this book, which is about relationships to the natural world, our garden, chronic illness, and a broader context, I guess, of living on this island. And we publish that on Friday morning as a digital form. And when those pages are acquired, they get knitted on demand. Only one edition of each writing, so there's only ever one blanket knitted per week, and each page is unique. And I guess the spine of this book is its holding by a community of readers who use their bodies to hold together the words and the weight of those words that we're writing each week. And I think Margaret might like to say a few things about the idea of heirlooms and ancestry. I might pass over.
Okay, thanks, Justy. Yeah, we really think of these works as heirloom pieces. People who've been acquiring them give us the feedback that they hold them very closely. They are wrapped in them. They are objects of care and comfort. And a number of years ago, in 2018, we had a big project called the People's Library, which is actually in the Garland article that Kevin referred to. Oh, Justy's just moving there, where we published 113 books by Tasmanian authors. And we were at the time in conversation with Irish artist Sean Lynch, who talked about this project as creating future memories. And in a way, I think the blankets, as another form of bookwork, are also future memories, published by us on a much smaller scale than the People's Library. But it's a book that will continue on. We're very inspired by almanacs, by recording what's happening weekly in the garden. We are in many ways set adrift here by illness, really. Justy has a number of chronic illness conditions that keep us here on this island, and in many ways our own histories here in Lutruwita, Tasmania, certainly for colonial settlers, have been peoples that have been set adrift. And in my own context, my family came here as convicts back in the 1800s, and much of our own family history has been suppressed or not spoken about or kept secret until very recently. So there's a number of sort of disconnects and ruptures that occurred in family histories, and we see the book project, the knitted book project, recording our life. And we from week to week, we don't know what memory is going to be published there, but we see this, I guess, as a way to bring our different histories from England, Ireland, back together as a book and to publish it as a future memory. So thank you very much, Kevin, for including us in
Thank you
in
for
this
sharing another wonderful
project
and
together.
original work that tells us a lot about how to embody stories. Thank you, Margaret and Justy. And finally, yes, we catch Emma before you head back to the museum. Wonderful to share another curious story of yours about the use of NFT for connecting, a bit like the story of Nilüfer with female deities.
100%, 100%. Thank you so much for having me. I am a queer disabled museum worker and writer based in Washington, D.C. So currently I reside on the ancestral lands of the Anacostans and Piscataway peoples in Falls Church, Virginia. I'm really privileged to be able to contribute to this issue. This specific article explores the histories of Beatriz Vigoni's pixelated homage to the Salvadorian icon, La Señora de la Paz. So specifically, Beatriz Vigoni grew up in Italy, and while not part of a deeply religious family, she was constantly kind of surrounded by the symbolism of Catholicism. As a result of that, she was constantly grappling with what it meant to identify as a woman, specifically a cis straight woman, within a community that idealized the Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, as kind of this patriarchal ideal. And a lot of what she experienced was bound in ideas of sexual purity of the Mother of God. So it was an interesting journey for her, joining as one of the founding members of the Holy Club, a creative studio based in Italy, focused on creating print art and later mural art. Creating these murals that locally adorned specifically sites of violence, specifically in Salvador, where Beatrice worked closely with a local arts initiative to create this image that reflected a local devotion to the Madonna, but at the same time exploring how she could, in partnership with Crypto Madonna Holy Club, like a subset of this creative group, create and raise funds for women and human rights by sharing NFTs that really humanized what it meant to be a woman, specifically looking through the lens of Mary. So it was a really interesting project, and I'm sorry to have to go so quickly for work, but it was a joy writing this piece, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Emma, for another very original and interesting story from first from El Salvador. So that's wonderful. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Just as before you head off, if we can just close the recording.